welcome back. Chapter 5, moving right along. So, when we look at Chapter 5, let's do a quick overview. What are we going to learn? It's important to kind of set our minds as a communicator and public speaker about what it is we're going to accomplish with anything in life. So, Chapter 5, the overview is again, we're going to talk about the types of research and sources which we could use for our speeches, specifically the informative and persuasive speeches. We're going to talk about internet research. We're going to talk about conducting our own research and using the campus library resources. When we think about public speaking, again, remember, public speaking involves content and relationship. So why do you think good research is important? And that's going to be our question for Chapter 5. Right off the bat, I'm throwing it out there, and I'm probably going to cover it. That's the amazing thing. Isn't that awesome? Let me give you pieces. So when we think about research, there are two different types. There's primary, and then there's secondary. Primary research is new research carried out to answer some sort of specific question or look at an issue and discover knowledge. This is what researchers do. It's research that acquires firsthand data. They're the ones actually conducting the research. The information that they have is unfiltered by any interpretation or editing. So when we think about that, primary research is done by scientists, by sociologists, by psychiatrists, by doctors, by people involved in a field. It doesn't always have to be. It could be a geologist because he's looking for oil or gold, right? There's lots of different angles here that primary research can be done by. But the reality is you're not going to be doing primary research, okay? Now, you might go to a primary source that could give you information, say an expert in the field. Now, that's okay. They can tell you about what it's like to do something, what it's like to be somewhere, what it's like to feel something or accomplish something, right? Primary sources can be good sources, but I don't want you doing primary research for this class. That's way beyond where we need to be. Secondary research is what you're going to be doing. Research gathered from published sources like magazines, books, newspapers. It's been compiled, it's been filtered, it's been edited, it's been interpreted in some way or shape or form. Or sometimes there's even secondary research that has been done. So it's the culmination of two different experiments or reports. That's what I want you looking for. All right. So when we think about primary sources, again, those are interviews with people that are professionals. You can do that. I don't want you to steer away from that. I just don't want you conducting your own surveys, questionnaires. Okay. That's where it gets tricky. Other sources of primary information, again, diaries or journal entries, oral histories, and direct observations. Now, I've done some of these in my communication research, but I don't expect you to do it. I was doing it for a master's degree. I don't want you going down that road. Secondary sources are just that. They're secondary. They're not the primary source. Secondary research is not necessarily bad information or inferior by any stretch of the imagination. It's been filtered, it's been gathered together by other experts in the field and put together in a way that's easier for all of us to interpret. What you need to be looking for is really depends on your topic and your purpose for your speech. It depends on the quality of primary sources and primary research. It depends on the quality of the writer who's compiling all those secondary sources, right? We're going to talk about how the library is going to play a huge role in this, and the librarian can be a big help for you. Now, I want you, though, to think about something. I want you to think about which of these would be the best source of information. YouTube, the National Enquirer, or the New York Daily Times? I want you to think about that. Which is the best source? And tell me why you think it would be the best source. Okay. I want you to interpret your thoughts on this. Here are my thoughts. Well, what the best source is, it really depends on your purpose and the topic that you're covering. For instance, if I'm covering politics, I'm probably going to lean more for the New York Daily Times. I'm going to probably lean less for the Inquirer. It just has a bad reputation of putting out not quite factual information. Is that fair? But let's say, for instance, I'm covering burgeoning fashion trends. What's going to be on the horizon for swimsuits in 2022? I might look at the National Enquirer and definitely would look at YouTube and other sources, probably catalogs, in an effort to put that information together. So it really depends on what your speech is about as to where you're going to go for your information. Really depends on the quality of the information provided by either primary or secondary sources. YouTube can be a great source, but it could be garbage. You're trusting people that you have no idea where they got their information from, right? More sources where we can find information. Books. Books can be amazing, but there is a drawback. Books have great depth of coverage about a topic. Information can be somewhat dated, and the real big drawback is books are lengthy and you have to read through them to get the information, right? One of my favorites, periodicals. I love magazines, newspapers, trade journals, academic journals. Those can be awesome. They're great because of the focus of record, the focus of the ideas, and they tend to be quite up to date, meaning a year or two old, and that's pretty recent. Okay. Researching though on the internet, hey, that can be real current, right? But we need to figure out what's real and what's not. And I've got a guideline of how to kind of go about doing that. So when you think about researching on the internet, we need to think about what are you looking for and what are you looking at? Meaning, where is this? What's the domain? www. What's the name, right? And what is the website based on? What are they trying to get across to the public? All websites are not created equal. All websites are not factual, and all websites can be misleading. Secondly, you can find sponsorship organizations or people that can verify or vet out what websites are good in their industry and what they're not. Don't go to social media. Please don't. I was part of a project with a social media network. I was on the payroll for about just over a year. And on this project, they were having a problem with fake news on their website. By the way, they still do. This social media channel was perplexed by both sides during the election of running fake news. I worked with Facebook. Ooh, gave it away. I worked with that social media giant in an effort to create ways that they could vet out what information is correct, what information is accurate, and what is hearsay. The point is, I don't want you to have to go to that much trouble. Steer clear of social media. It will only lead you astray. 2, evaluate websites. There is a simple way to do it. It's called Kapow. So first is currency, meaning recency. How often is the information on the website updated? how often is it published? Excuse me. You can check this out by looking in. Some of us have done this on accident, literally getting into the field under, if you're using Google, let's say for instance, Chrome, you can get into the field where you can see information that's not just what they want you to see, but it's actually filtering information. It'll tell you how recently they've updated the page. If I was trying to come up with fashion tips for 2022, I certainly wouldn't want to be looking at a page that was giving me the hottest fashion tips coming up for the next year, and the last time it was updated was 2016. So currency is important. How recent is the information they have on their website? Secondly, authority. What are their credentials, or what is their credibility? How do other people review them? You can do a simple Google search on just about anyone and find out how people feel about anything. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but the point is, the more people who trust something, the safer you feel about purchasing it, right? Or maybe purchasing it in our brain, meaning accepting that information is real. Another part of Kapow is the purpose. What is the meaning of their information? Why are they producing it? Why are they publishing it? What is their intent? We all have an agenda. Remember, most of the time purposes should be informative or persuasive, entertaining. And if so, what are they trying to accomplish? The O in Kapow stands for objectivity. Does it lack bias, or is it highly slanted? If it only gives one opinion and one opinion only, there's no objectivity, right? That's bias. And that means that probably the information you're getting is not 100% accurate. Also, look at the writing style. Look at tone. Look for errors. Look at their attitude towards the other side. If you see a lot of errors on a website, especially grammatical, run away, right? There's a whole process of people trying to use psychographics to manipulate our minds. And many of these people are actually even outside of our country, trying to manipulate the minds of American citizens. It's crazy to think, but they're doing it. And they're able to do it because we're not paying attention to where we're getting our information from. Now, I told you, steer clear of conducting your own research. Mimi, I tell you. So, the big dog was drinking. Steer clear of it because it's too difficult, because it can create your own sense of bias within the survey or the questions you ask. Surveys are good for understanding audiences. Make sure you use multiple choice questions if you ever use one. Be sure to provide for all options. Phrase the questions carefully and positively without bias or loaded questions. For example, do you feel negatively about your college experience at North Georgia Technical College? I'm already loading it. Do you feel? Do you feel? Do you see how I did that? That's loading a question. I'm trying to get you to answer a specific way. Whether you do it or not, it's up to you, but the point is, I'm trying. So you have to be careful. Otherwise, we lead our research. And if we lead our research, we're influencing the data. And if we influence the data, it's not true data. And sooner or later, we will be found out. And that will affect our credibility. Interviews are a great way, though, if you are going to conduct your own research. Interview someone who's an expert in the field. All right. Now, first, though, I would suggest you read published sources before you interview. That way you can create good questions and have an idea of what you're going to go in and try to accomplish in the interview. You want to have your questions prepared in advance, right? You need to also make sure you choose the right person, someone who's willing to talk with you, someone who's willing and has the firsthand knowledge or credentials you're looking for to make them an expert. Because if you're basing your persuasion or informative speeches on this information, it needs to look credible to your audience, right? Always take the time to make an appointment and be on time. Be maybe 5 minutes early, but don't be like 15 minutes early. Definitely don't be late. Their time is valuable. They're an expert. Obviously, like I told you, prepare the questions in advance. Ask them in a logical order, meaning I wouldn't ask my hardest questions up front. I will ask my hardest questions towards the back end of, I would lead in by having them explain their level of credibility, their credentials, their knowledge. Always ask questions that the person can answer and is willing to answer. Ask questions which are in the realm of their experience and are appropriate and not embarrassing to them. And if they grant you an interview and you conduct the interview, have a thank you note written out in advance. Hand that to them as you're leaving. They've really helped you out, and be courteous to them. Because if you do that, that'll go a long way. A couple of my friends in the industry have done that. The next thing you know, they're getting a call back and getting a job offer within their field. It's pretty amazing. Using source materials, books, publications, things like that. What are source materials? Well, they're the difference between common knowledge and unique knowledge, meaning they are books, they're information that's been compiled, right? Secondary sources, like we talked about, that have been compiled. If you find information in multiple sources, find out who those sources are citing and then cite that citation, meaning cite whoever it is. But when you find out, most people say, okay, well, that's not good enough for me. I need more. So if you don't want to miss points on your speech, make sure you're covering who says, why do they say? Which leads me to our library here. We have a great library full of books and publications that we can get. Now, we may not have it tons at our disposal in our library, but through the interlibrary loan, they can get books from just about any college campus you can imagine or university campus you can imagine. And then you have Galileo, and I use Galileo all the time, including in my job currently, to access databases. I can look up subjects and topics. I can look up journals that have been written about things I'm trying to influence people, ways to influence people to get them to buy products, right? So ask your librarian for help. They can help you so much, but you have to reach out. Otherwise, they're not going to help. All right, we're going to jump over into chapter 5. Bear with me for 1 second. Sorry, jump into chapter 6. That was chapter 5. It's a very short one. That's why I group it together with the next one, 6. Oops. Hold on 1 second. Boy, this thing. All right, there we go. Share application. This was so much easier when I had multiple screens. So much easier. All right. I did that to myself. I downsized. So, all right. So let's look at our next chapter. If you have questions about what to use or where to go for information, email me. I'll be happy to kind of point you in some directions. Remember, the speech you're doing, you should have some information about. You just want to cite a couple sources to make sure that your information is accurate and make sure that the public understands that your information is current, is relevant, is credible. So when we look at chapter 6, why is it that we organize our speeches? Because we as human beings are logical people, logical beings, and we want that organization. Okay. So we need it. We crave it. It helps keep us as a good listener, keeps us organized in our brain so that we can be a good audience for a speech. We're going to look at the patterns of organization in speeches, and we're going to look at connective statements. We're also going to talk about outlining. Why do we need organization in our speeches? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We generally have to have limits on the number of ideas so that we can keep our mind together and keep our topic relevant for our audience. So, an average audience can remember 3 to 5 things, meaning you better not have more points than that or you're losing them. 3 points are ideal. Anyone can remember 3 points. That's why I try not to cover too much per lesson. When we think about our specific purpose for our speech, we should be able to break that down into points, into ideas. The categories of information should be distinct, different, and clear, meaning it should be understandable, and they should be different, meaning when I talk about the history of, for instance, one of the speeches I mentioned was the history of an organization and then how that organization will affect our daily lives. All right. So that organization I mentioned a couple of classes ago, and I keep coming back to, is hospice. Now, for those who don't know what hospice is hospice takes care of people who are in near-death experiences. Right? So hospice does that. Hospice takes care of people as they're dying of cancer or they're dying of terminal illnesses. And they help soften that blow and they absorb some of the care so that family isn't solely responsible for that care. And they also provide counseling for family to help them through that time. So you can see now suddenly why this is an important thing. And yes, 68% right now, or well, last survey in 2012. I expect another survey within the next year, and hospice will have affected even more of a larger percentage of our population. So, throughout your lifetime, it is almost destined to affect you. Someone you know will die of a terminal illness, will die in a way that is a lasting way, and you'll have to provide care, or some family members will have to provide care. And it's a serious thing. It's kind of scary. And for those of us who've done it more than once, it doesn't really get easier. So when we think about creating that idea and trying to put it together for an audience, I have to organize it in 3 steps. I have to group, label, and order. So when I group things, I look for patterns and connections of data and research. We can't have 15 points or 20 points in a speech. So we want 5 or fewer points. So we're going to group ideas together, meaning I mentioned cancer, I mentioned Alzheimer's, I mentioned a few things, end of life. They're different, but they're all end of life. Someone's terminally ill, they're going to pass away. That's who hospice helps most. So that idea could be 15 different ideas, but yet I've grouped them together to show you it's an end of life moment. When we think about organized speakers, they gain credibility with their audience, and their audience will understand and retain the information better for years to come. One of my students emailed me last semester and said, I remember you talking about hospice, and I remember briefly you just given some information. I never thought it would affect me, and here I am. My grandmother is dying of cancer, and I'm seeing hospice every day. It was a year after they had taken my course. It's a real thing. It happens to people. That's why it's kind of a good topic. I'm not telling you to take that topic at all. What I'm saying is look for a topic that grabs you. Look for a topic that will involve almost all of us and make it real. Bring it to us in a new way. Look for patterns of organization. When I said earlier, chunking, meaning grouping together. When we do that, it keeps us from going and then, like a little kid. When we were little kids, we did that when we told a story. And then what happened? You know what happened? And then this happened. And then we don't want to give our speeches that way, right? It's nice to feel excited like a child, but the reality is we want to be smoother with our transitions. We want to use words that are going to segue from one idea to the next. Don't be too broad. Don't be too much. Okay? What I mean by that is don't be too broad and cover too much material. You also don't be too much of a knowledge expert because, again, you need to show me that you've done some research. If you don't show me you've done some research, 10 points off right off the bat, man. You're losing points. We don't want that. Think about your specific purpose. Usually, a lot of specific purposes or speeches are chronological, meaning A to B to C to D. Not more than that. Notice I didn't say A to Z, just a few steps. So when we think about chronological order, we're talking about time order or any sequence order, right? So time order, first thing happens, second thing happens, third thing happens. When I think about that idea of the hospice speech, first someone's diagnosed with a terminal illness. We realize that there's an end of life, and hospice comes on board to help all of us deal with that in various ways. And then you can tell about the ways and at different times how hospice steps in and helps even further. One of the other ways we can organize our speech is spatially, meaning moving through a space or location. So I could give a speech on the Empire State Building, and I'm going to go back. If I'm giving you a speech on the Empire State Building and it's chronological, I'm going to hit when they planned it, when they broke ground, when they started construction, real construction moving upward in the sky. I'm going to talk about any problems they hit, and then I'm going to talk about when they finished the building. I might talk about at the very end how the building is being used today. That's chronological order on the Empire State Building. Spatially, let's take that one. Spatially, I'm going to walk you through the spaces of the Empire State Building. I'm going to talk about how tall it is, when it was one of the tallest buildings in the United States and in the world. And I'm going to walk you literally floor by floor through the space as to what those spaces are used for. It's a different way of doing a speech about a building entirely, right? And it can be quite interesting, but I have to have a lot of knowledge about that building. And then there's another type of organization called parts of the whole and or topical organization. So when we think about this, we're thinking about kinds of things or types of things, varieties of things, categories of things. So when we think about the Empire State Building concept, parts of the whole, I'm going to talk about the different areas and how they're utilized by different businesses for a variety of roles. When I think about World Trade Center and the Twin Towers, I had friends that lost their life that day. I had worked in a financial institution. I had worked in a department that moved money to what we call money managers, large sums of money every day. And then I moved over to corporate communications from there. So I was in corporate communications, and then I had left and went into banking. But I still remember those guys. So when I saw the building collapse, I remembered there were certain businesses were on specific floors. Certain Oppenheimer was on specific floors. I remember those things because I knew. So the business, the building was used for financial, and I'm going to talk a lot about the financial businesses within the building. I would talk about both investment and banking. I would talk about shipping and receiving, which were also in that building. Lots of different organization there. It makes it for a complex speech, but I'm going to walk you through what floors are used for what. Now remember, parts of the whole can also be used for things like, a great example for parts of the whole would be why we should stop using plastics, single-use plastics. And we can walk you through why we should stop and how much of an impact that would make on debris and trash every year, and how long those plastics last in the ground if they're not recycled. So you see, I would walk you through that whole idea set, but I would always keep my strongest, most important argument as my last argument, because I want to sway you. I want you to believe. Then there's problem solutions. And again, this is another great one for things like inoculation, or problem solution would be, again, pollution. Problem solutions work best for persuasive speeches. Sometimes we call them problem, cause, solution, because we're walking our audience through what a problem is, what causes the problem, and how do we solve it. It is another variation of the Monroe's motivated sequence, meaning for you to want to affect your environment, you have to be in a comfortable position to do so, meaning you're not going to recycle if you don't even have your own place, typically. Okay? There's certain key components that have to be in place before other things can be dealt with. Now, problem solution or problem cause solution are very logical. We want to talk about the problem first. We want to talk about maybe what causes the problem, and then we want to talk about the solution, because the solution is the thing we want people to buy in on. So it's more logical to talk about a problem than solve the problem. Other organizational principles exist. I'm just giving you some basics. You know, your main points need to be somewhat equal in emphasis and in value, as well as time spent on them. We don't want to de-emphasize a point by barely mentioning it and then emphasize another point by spending most of our speech on it. You can use two different organizational patterns, but I'm not recommending you to do that. Keep it simple. I'm a big proponent of that. Keep it simple. When you are making your organization and you're compiling and you're grouping, chunking, make sure you label things. Use full sentences. Use any parallels that people can understand. And on your note cards, don't write such vague descriptions or just directions to yourself that you can't move yourself from point A to point B to point C. The instructor and audience needs to be able to understand how you're working through this problem. We do that through connectives. All right. These are on the page, are not even exhausting all of the connectives. It's tons of connectives out there. But the point is, they allow us to walk through ideas. When we're sequencing, we're going to use words like first, second, third, or next, afterwards, finally. If we're using opinions, we're going to probably talk about things, it would seem, it appears as, possibly, one might presume, phrases like that. When we think about illustrating things, we'll say, for example, walking you through the first floor of the Empire State Building, there's a large foyer with the elevators. There's an information desk. We're going to talk about examples, giving the audience examples as they move through a space, right? Remember, one of the ones I'm looking for on all speeches is in conclusion, or to conclude, or finally, to summarize. Those phrases signal conclusion. You're moving into the end of the speech. You need to do that so your audience stays with you. Remember, speeches typically have three parts: an introduction, the body of the speech, which is where you're going to show your main ideas, and a conclusion. We talked about that early, lesson 1, the first example. Right? Connectives come in the body. typically. You can use a connective in the introduction. You can use connectives throughout, and you definitely want to use them in conclusion, right? But they are phrases, parts of sentences that connect parts of speech and show relationship between the ideas, between our points. They walk our audience through them. They remind our audience of what the main points are. They forecast where we're heading next. They explain our logic, and they help keep people's attention. That's why we use connectives. Make sure you're thinking about using connectives in your speech. So many things to think about, right? When the public speaking is deep and has a lot of components. But I want you to start thinking about these ideas. They are important. They do matter. So let's talk about outlining, because this is important. All right? I'm showing the body of a speech. Typically, you're going to have an introduction, then your body of your speech, and then your conclusion. But I'm really concentrating mainly on outlining. And I'm showing you rough outlining because this is where we start. You have to figure out what are the main parts of your speech first. So you need to find what your main point number one is. In my speech about hospice, it's the history of hospice. My point number two is how it affects people today. And point number three is how it will affect you in the future. There's my main points. When we think about that, we can add our connectives. You notice I used and how it will affect us in the future. I actually transitioned you through the ideas. Remember, the connectives are just that. They are for connecting. They do not provide evidence, and they do not substantiate fact or fiction. Okay? They're just there as words to guide an audience through your speech. In certain speeches, sometimes I've seen them just be a word or two, or sometimes I've seen them be whole ideas, a whole sentence. I want you to think about them, and if you need to, I want you to include them on your outline. Because I'm looking for them, and if I don't hear them, I'm marking off. So don't leave it to an ad lib, because if you do it, you may not remember to use your connective words. Vary your connective words. Don't use the same connective phrase over and over. And on occasion, you may need connections between subpoints, but please don't dive too deep in your speeches, because most of our speeches aren't that long. If they are that long, then yeah, we'll have subpoints. But the reality is, keep it simple. Your audience can follow it better. I'm not saying your audience is stupid by any stretch, but remember, we can only remember 3 to 5 things and do it well. So outlining is like a blueprint. It is not the speech. It is the plan and practice of how you're going to give the speech. There are 2 types of outline. There's a preparation outline. You just saw it. It's the blueprint. It's basically coming up with some ideas and being able to move them around and create an all-encompassing idea of a speech. Okay. The second outline is actually speaking outline. Now, you may have those on your note cards, or you will have directions on your note cards about how to speak. Remember, note cards, if I see paper and if I hear you reading, points deducted. So please think about it. It's too easy to try to read off the screen, but then we sound like we're reading, and then the next thing you know, it's boring to the audience, and you're not doing a great job at that point. I want you to be the best you can be. That's it for chapter 6. So we did 5 and 6 in this video. I want to thank you very much. So thank you for participating. I will send the question out for this week. So thank you very much. Again, I hope to see you soon.